Hello and welcome. My name is Courtney. I am a psychic mentor, teacher, guide, healer, etc. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the misconceptions that a lot of people have about psychic work. I'm coming to you live from my friend's bedroom because whilst I am back in Scotland, I'm staying with my lovely friend who lives right next to a primary school, which is really annoying. So I'm having to hide out in here while the kids are all outside playing. So, anyway, I digress. I wanted to make this video because there are so many questions I get asked, and also so many misconceptions that I see flying around the internet around what actually constitutes a psychic, and also the various different ways that psychic gifts actually work. And so I want to clear up some of those misconceptions today. So I want to start with the idea that only certain people are psychic, or that you're either born psychic and you either have those gifts or you just develop them, or you have no way to develop them, right? You're born psychic or you're not born psychic. And I actually see a lot of, especially like mediums seem to be really bad for proliferating this understanding and this belief, right? And I'm a medium myself. I speak with the dead. That's not something new to me, right? And so I don't understand why they like to proliferate this. But anyway, there seems to be a sort of understanding amongst a lot of people, or a frame of reference, a frame of understanding amongst a lot of people, that only if you are born psychic do you actually have those gifts. And nothing could be further from the truth. We all have the capacity to be psychic. Those capacities may vary. Often we can be people who are born maybe more open or more intuitive. I would definitely consider myself in that category, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to put in the work to continue those gifts, right? To allow those gifts to continue to evolve. People who are born very psychic can lose those capacities if they do not work them. It, like any muscle, they can atrophy, and it's actually really common. And we hear this a lot from people who'll say, yeah, I used to see spirits when I was young, I used to see ghosts, I used to interact with things, and then all of a sudden it shut down, or all of a sudden or gradually over time I no longer had those gifts and capacities anymore. And that's because we live in a world that, for the most part, doesn't create the foundations or give us the frameworks where we can situate ourselves within that and go, these are my experiences, this is normal, this is natural, and here's how I can continue to expand those. Instead, they tell us that these things, especially in the West, are not real. And if you do hear voices, or you do have some kind of communication with something outside of yourself that you cannot physically see, or that maybe other people can't see, then that means that you are you have some sort of mental illness or deficiency or problem, right? And so what's more helpful to look at it as is, these are muscles. These are things that anybody can activate, anybody can attune themselves deeper to, anyone can become more receptive to the subtle realms, to the realms of the feminine, to the realms of that we would consider psychic in nature, right? The things that are not so tangible in this reality, the more subtle layers of reality. Anybody can become attuned and aware and work with those in their own lives. Every single person on this earth has that capacity on some level. The differences are where we have people who have maybe done this over lifetime, across lifetime, then yes, probably when you come into this life, you're going to have that volume turned up on that kind of thing a little bit more than other people. But those other people who didn't have that volume turned up could still become a better psychic than you if they work hard enough, right? And so, for me personally, yes, I was very open. However, I would say most of where I've got to is through through hard work. It's like anything in this life, it is dedication, it is devotion, it is time, it is taking the time to develop those skills of discernment, being able to tell, when you're feeling fear and that fear is clouding what you're seeing, or any other emotion, right? Being able to discern what is true, what is actual, facts, and what is fantasy. All of those things only come with practice. You could be born very open psychically, right? And have terrible, terrible discernment. You could be very intuitive and yet not able to work out how that information actually serves you or the people around you, right? So just because we are open doesn't mean that we're actually going to do anything with those gifts, doesn't mean that we're going to use them in the right way, right? Because people can use them in ways that are harmful. We see that all the time on the main stage, right? So there's so many different angles and avenues that we can look at when we're trying to understand, well, what is psychic perception and how does it work? But the main point around this thread is that everybody has it, and that the more work you put into it, the better you will become. That is just a foundational thing for everybody, right? And another piece with this too is, often as healers, we have programmed in on a soul level that we might not activate certain gifts until we are in service, until we are really looking after our body, until we are taking those next right steps, until our higher self knows that we are actually following those basic steps, and we're able to actually work with the information that we're receiving. We're not going to get those bigger downloads. So often when clients come to me and they're like, yeah, I want to expand my gifts and I don't feel like those are turning on, I'm like, okay, diet, okay, exercise, all the little things that we often, especially those of us that are more spiritually inclined, we actually want to avoid those. We don't want to take action on them. They are often the dials that we need to turn in order for our capacities to expand and to come online more. So we can never leave the body behind. We can never leave behind those physical layers, because all of them are informing those other more etheric or spiritual layers of our reality. The other thing as well, where I would say that some people kind of have it or they don't, and that's basically just dependent on what you've programmed in on a soul level to experience, is the galactic side of things, because not everybody has the faculties or the programs to be able to communicate with beings who are more extraterrestrial or multidimensional in that way. A lot of people, I'd say everybody has the capacity to communicate with the dead, has the capacity to communicate with ancestors, etc., if they're willing to put in the work to get there. However, when it comes to galactic beings, and I don't just mean angels and things, I mean beings like Arcturians, Syrians, Andromedans, Orions, etc., all of those beings that we would consider more celestial or more star-based consciousness, not everybody has the programming to communicate with those. And that might be because it is just not relevant for them in this lifetime. It might be because they haven't designated on that higher self level that they need those codes in this lifetime. It could be because they've never had other lifetimes that are significant enough for them to actually bring those parts of them online in this earth-based reality. And so that would be the one thing I would say where you kind of either have it or you don't. And that goes for things like trance channeling as well. A lot of people don't actually have the codex for that because it isn't relative to their mission, and so they've not programmed it in. So those would be the things that I would say probably that it would be, there's a yes or a no, right? There's actually quite a hard line of whether you have those capacities and faculties or not. But everything else is pretty much free game, right? As long as we are willing to do the work, we're willing to work really, really hard to get those things to come online, then it's anyone's game, right? And so The other piece that I see around this is people saying, I'm clairvoyant, I'm clairaudient. I always call bullshit on that, because everybody has all of these psychic senses, right? Just as we all, generally speaking, have our sight, our hearing, our taste of, our sense of taste, our sense of smell, etc. Those basic five senses, our sense of touch, our sense of feeling, those expand. Those are in the psychic realms, are just expanded forms of those same senses that we access by de-armoring ourselves, that we access by going, okay, yeah, I've got a wall up here, I'm going to take that wall down, and that's how we become more sensitive, right? So where people like to try and say that they're only one thing, or they only have one sense, that isn't isn't technically true, right? Unless you genuinely have some sort of deficiency, there's no reason why those other senses cannot activate for you. What I find with most people is that they are very claircognizant and they are very clairsentient. So they know what they know, and they can't explain how the fuck they know it. Or they're very clairsentient, like they just feel everything. You walk into a room, you can feel people's energy shift, or you're very, and we would class empathy within that sort of clairsentience. It's a similar capacity, in that we can, if someone's upset, we're like, oh my God, I feel your pain, etc. Right? That those tend to be the ones that most people carry quite more strongly than the other ones, but they're maybe not aware of it. And so those we would class as more subtle or feminine versions of the psychic senses. Clairaudience is like very loud. Clairvoyance, where you receive images as well, those are more associated with the sun. They're more masculine, they're more in your face. It's like, oh my God, I'm seeing this thing, I can't not see it, right? And so often the task is that we are required to develop the more lunar senses, so the clear sense of knowing and the clear sense of feeling, of sensing, before those other faculties will begin to open up. And often we've programmed it in that way because there's no reason why you should be having really powerful visions and hearing voices from your guides, your ancestors, your angels, etc. Hearing pieces of information like that, if you can sense within yourself whether it's true or not, whether it's useful or not. Those senses, particularly clairvoyance, is one of the ones that is most easily hijacked. I'll often hear people saying, yeah, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this. And I'm like, there's nothing behind that, hon, I'm so sorry. It's really flat, the current behind it, right? So you can tell that it's not true psychic information. It doesn't have the true quality of being, real psychic perception, right? Because there's a difference between sitting and imagining images and actually receiving those deep, true psychic impressions or perceptions. And that's why for most healers, helpers on the planet, you will actually be more claircognizant and clairsentient first before those other senses open up, because you need to know how to have some level of mastery over certain ones first before those other ones will unlock. Now, of course, like everything, there can be gray area and there's no real hard and fast rules when it comes to this kind of thing. Some people will say, oh well, actually I've been more clairaudient and more clairvoyant rather than the other ones. That's okay, right? There's no right way or wrong way, but these are the patterns that I tend to see with healers, helpers, the people that I work with, the people I support on this earth plane. It tends to be that they are tasked with tuning in and becoming more masterful over their clear knowing and their clear sensing before they move on to other things. So whenever someone comes to me and they're like, I'm clairvoyant, or I'm only clairaudient, I can only hear things, right? That's usually a sign that either they're potentially receiving just distorted information, or the other faculties have not been developed enough, right? So what can happen is people only work one sense and become very obsessed with, I just want to see, I just want to see. And so they do a lot of work on that one particular sense rather than all of their senses moving in almost like a synesthesic motion, right? Which is how we want our psychic senses to develop, is them all moving in this one motion together, right? So when I'm doing a reading for somebody, I am hearing, seeing, sensing, feeling, knowing all at the same time, right? I'm getting pieces of this through all of my psychic senses working in tandem with each other, right? The frequencies are intertwined, and that is a sign of a more advanced development, because if not, we're just separating our senses, and probably if you are very, very strong in one, it means the other ones are underdeveloped. So I always try and steer people away from this idea of, oh, I'm clairvoyant, or oh, I'm clairaudient, right? Because either they just haven't realized that they're actually using way more of their senses, which is quite a common thing. You know, we don't get taught this stuff. We often don't get taught it well, even if we do have some level of education around it. And so people are often missing signs and signals that their bodies are sending them without even realizing. So where we want to begin, if we know that actually I'm more clear seeing and clear knowing, we want to get really, really good at those, and then just allowing naturally for the other ones to open up. And then if we're more on the other side, again, we just want to start to begin to unlock the other ones, the more subtle senses, because we can often overlook the really good data and information that we're actually receiving from those more subtle senses rather than the ones that seem really loud, right? Because it's like, it's not always useful for people just to hear all of the clairvoyant impressions that you're seeing. Oh, I'm seeing a red balloon, oh, I'm seeing a cloud, right? These things are can mean different things to different people. And so we always want to be honing all of our senses together, our discernment alongside all of those things, and really get to know the language that your own consciousness is using to speak to you, because a red balloon to one person might mean something completely different to a red balloon to others, right? My guides, if I'm getting distracted, my guides show me a white duck, right? That, and when I see that white duck, I'm like, okay, Courtney, you're going a little bit off in this other direction here. Let's pull it back. And if somebody else saw that white duck, it might mean something completely and utterly different. So we really have to be using our discernment. We don't just take things at face value. We're trying to understand the deeper web of information that we're receiving, and that's going to look slightly different for everybody. So I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to share. Last thing is, with our psychic senses, we always want to have an air of playfulness, right? We don't want to take it too seriously. That's when we really start to distort information, by God. We want to have some level of play, some level of lightness when we go into deep psychic work, because the information that we'll receive will be so much clearer. And I say this to my clients all the time. I'm like, let the emotion pass, let the emotion burn before you start trying to dig into where the hell this thing came from or why you're experiencing it. Because the thing that clouds this work the most is desire, is emotion. It clouds our emotional body, it clouds our astral body. And we're not able to actually see the true resonance, the true field of information that sits behind whatever those distortions might be. And so clarity and a sense of lightness will always give you far more precise information than if you go into something with an agenda. If you go into something trying to dig in, trying to, all of that kind of stuff will always cloud and distort the information that you're actually trying to access. So let me see if there was anything else. Yeah, just literally have fun, especially, when you're at the beginning of your journey. with this kind of stuff, have fun, make it enjoyable, make it something that is has this energy of joy and playfulness behind it, because otherwise we end up spiraling and going down these crazy tracks, which I see people do, especially online, all of the time, right? And they're like, I've built this reading through about all this stuff that's going on in the world and blah blah blah. And it's like, there's a lot of distortion at play behind that kind of stuff, and that's where you know that someone didn't go into receiving a transmission, or didn't go into channeling, or didn't go into that psychic excavation from a place of neutrality, but they went in trying to find a certain thing, right? Is similar to any kind of science or scientific theory, right? You don't go in looking to find this one thing, because you're going to cloud it. You go in open, and actually most often you end up being surprised. Thank you so much for watching this video. Take care. Goodbye.